The moment the new girl, Alina, stepped onto the field trip platform overlooking the old jungle reserve, she could feel dozens of eyes boring into her, some curious, some mocking, and one pair full of something far darker. That pair belonged to Raiden, the school's infamous bully, a boy who had built his reputation by breaking others down for sport. Alina, having transferred only 3 days earlier, had hoped blending into the background would protect her from the usual school predators. But Raiden had locked onto the moment she showed up with her shy smile, oversized backpack, and the quiet confidence of someone who'd learned not to be shaken easily. The class gathered near the railing, peering down at the murky pond teeming with red-finned piranhas, an old attraction the reserve kept for controlled demonstrations. The teachers warned the students to remain behind the safety ropes. But Raiden wasn't listening. His eyes were fixed on Alina like she was prey, and he knew the teachers were too busy explaining the tour rules to notice anything unusual. He stepped closer to her, pretending to stretch, pretending to yawn, pretending to act normal, until his hand darted out like a snake and shoved her forward. Alina gasped, arms flailing, the world spinning as she toppled over the railing and plunged downward. The class screamed. One girl fainted. And Raiden grinned like he'd just pulled off the prank of the century. But the grin didn't last. Because instead of thrashing, instead of crying, instead of begging for help as she hit the water, Alina vanished under the surface so quickly and silently that even the piranhas seemed confused. The water rippled for a moment, then went eerily still. The students looked on in horror as the pond remained quiet. Too quiet. Raiden's heart, for the first time in years, began to pound not with thrill but with fear. The teacher spun around, saw the chaos, and immediately initiated rescue protocols, shouting orders through walkie-talkies and throwing emergency nets. Raiden tried to play it cool, muttering that she probably swam to the edge, that she was probably fine, that everyone was overreacting, but his voice shook, betraying him. Seconds crawled into a full minute, then 2, then 5. The tension was suffocating. The surface of the pond, disturbed only by the flicker of silver fins, offered no sign of life or death. Then, without warning, something exploded upward from beneath the water with such force that every student staggered backward. It wasn't Alina. It was a wall of piranhas, scattering like a school of terrified minnows fleeing from something bigger, stronger, and dominant. The teachers froze. The students gasped. Raiden's face drained of color. And then, through the chaos of boiling water and fleeing fish, Alina rose, calm, steady, and completely unhurt. She pushed back her wet hair, breathing evenly, her eyes no longer timid but sharp, trained directly on the boy who had shoved her. The class stared in shock as she stepped toward the platform ladder, climbing with fluid, controlled precision that felt unnatural for someone who had survived a pond full of razor-toothed predators. Whispers rose. What happened? Why didn't the fish attack? How did she stay under so long? Alina offered no explanation. She simply stepped out of the water, shoes squishing, clothes soaked, staring straight at Raiden, not with anger, but with a chilling calm that froze him in place. And that was the moment he realized he hadn't pushed a helpless victim into danger. He had awoken something far more terrifying. Raiden stumbled backward as Alina approached, her steps slow and deliberate, water dripping from her hair like tiny beads of liquid silver. The class formed a wide circle around them, torn between fear and fascination, unsure whether to comfort her or run from her. Raiden tried to speak, an apology, an excuse, a lie, anything that would shield him from the growing dread inside his chest. But his throat tightened, as if invisible fingers were squeezing it shut. Alina stopped only a foot away from him, her expression unreadable. Before she could utter a word, the reserve director sprinted onto the scene with several handlers in tow, all pale and breathless. They had been reviewing the pond's live feed cameras, something students never had access to, and what they saw had shaken even the most seasoned wildlife experts. You weren't attacked," the director whispered, eyes wide with disbelief. "In fact, the piranhas moved away from you. All of them. Instantly." The handlers nodded, confirming what the students had just seen. Some even stepped back from her, as if she were a force of nature rather than a drenched teenage girl. Raiden's skin crawled. Suddenly, Alina's calm composure seemed less like bravery and more like something ancient, something instinctive, something not taught in any school. She finally spoke, her voice soft but carrying enough weight to silence the murmuring crowd. "I didn't want any trouble," she said. "But you pushed me." The simplicity of the statement hit harder than a scream would have. Raiden's knees wobbled. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but painful guilt began to gnaw at his stomach. Not just guilt for what he did today, but for every victim he'd ever tormented. Memories flashed through his mind. The smaller boy he locked in a locker, the quiet kid whose lunch he threw away, the girl he mocked until she cried. All those moments washed over him like cold water, and for the first time in his life, he saw himself clearly, and he hated what he saw. Suddenly, the director turned to Raiden, fury blazing. "You could have killed her," he snapped. "You're suspended." Immediately, gasps rose from the crowd. A couple of students nodded in agreement, while others looked at Raiden with disgust, emboldened now that the authority figures had taken charge. But before the director could continue, the pond behind him began to ripple again, this time with controlled, synchronized movement. Dozens of piranhas surfaced in a perfect circle as if responding to an unseen command. Their fins glimmered in the light, forming shapes too geometric to be random. Several students screamed. Teachers backed away, and even the handlers panicked. But Alina? She simply turned her head and watched the fish quietly, her gaze softening as though she were acknowledging old friends. Then, as quickly as it began, the fish dispersed back into the depths. Silence fell. Heavy, electric, terrifying. Raiden's breath hitched. His fear peaked. He dropped to his knees, shaking uncontrollably, the weight of everything crashing over him. "I'm sorry," he whispered, voice cracking. "I'm sorry. Please don't let them hurt me." Alina's expression softened, and she crouched down to his level. The crowd leaned in, every pair of eyes glued to the scene. "They won't hurt you," she said gently, "unless I want them to." Raiden's heart stopped. Tears streamed down his face as he shook his head violently. "Please, please, I'll never hurt anyone again. I swear." For a moment, the world froze. Then Alina placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. "Good," she said simply. "Then there's nothing to fear." She stood, walked past him, and the crowd parted like she was royalty or something far more powerful. Raiden stayed on his knees long after she was gone, trembling, humbled, and haunted by the realization that mercy, not power, was what she chose to show him, and that, somehow, terrified him the most.